Welcome to today's lesson. In this first tutorial, we will discover and recreate the pattern for a perfect square trinomial. So we're about to get into the process of completing the square. Completing the square is a method we can use to solve our quadratic equations. We have already solved our quadratic equations by graphing and by factoring. Completing the square is the third method of the four methods we are going to learn, but it's a pretty powerful method because it can be used to solve all quadratic equations, not just some of them. Before we get into the specifics of completing the square, I'd like to look at the pattern that will happen in the middle of our process. I have four special trinomials listed right here and their factors underneath. I'm going to reveal the first two, and I'd like to see if we can find a pattern of how we get from the trinomial to its factors. How we get from this trinomial to its factors. Why don't you pause the video and look at the variables, look at the numbers, look at the signs, and see if you can come up with a pattern that's happening here, and maybe predict what happens underneath here and underneath here. Why don't you pause now? I'll come back on and see if we discovered the same pattern. So what did we discover? The first thing you might have noticed is that these two trinomials factor into identical factors. The two factors are the same things, x minus 5 and another x minus 5, which is why we get to write them with a quantity squared. X plus 7 and another x plus 7. So we can use the squared instead of writing them side by side. And you're correct, these will also factor into quantities that are squared. But let's dive a little bit deeper. Let's look at the signs. This one has a plus sign and this one has a minus sign. Why is that? If you notice, all four of these trinomials end with a plus sign. And that's important to know because that means that both factors have to have the same signs. They're either both pluses or they're both minuses. And that's why the first sign will tell you what they are. This is a plus sign because the first sign is a positive. This is a minus sign because the first sign is a minus sign. So I know underneath here there's going to be a plus sign, and I know underneath here there's going to be a minus sign. So that's our signs. Let's look at our variables. Well, we start with x squared, and the factors have an x. Well, that's pretty simple because it's just the square root of x squared. And that's why this is going to have an x right here. Let's look at the numbers. Where did 7 come from? I see a 14 here, and I see a 49 here. Well, the square root of 49 is 7, and half of 14 is 7. Is that just coincidence, or does that work over here as well? The square root of 25, ooh, that's 5. And half of negative 10 is negative 5. Oh, that's kind of neat. I wonder if that works right over here. The square root of 4 is a 2, and half of this 4 is also 2. So that must mean that there's an x plus 2 there. And we're correct. I wonder what's underneath this purple blob. So I know that there's a minus sign. I know that there's an x. What's half of 9? Or what's the square root of 81/4? Both of them are the same answer. They're 9/2. So I can take the square root of this third number to get what's in my factors, or I could take half of this number to get what's in my factors. Watch out for your signs. And that's what's happening in the middle of our process. Let's see if we can do a little bit more. Let's say we've got x squared plus 10x plus a blank. I wonder what number will fit right here to make this a perfect square trinomial. Well, here's how we can do it. Well, all we have to do is take half of this middle coefficient. If I take half of 10, of course I get 5. What I do with this 5 now, I square it, and that will go up into my trinomial. Half of 10 is 5, and 5 squared is 25. X squared plus 10x plus 25 is a perfect square trinomial, and it will factor into x plus 5 quantity squared. Let's see if we can continue that pattern over here. We take half of this middle number. Half of negative 4 is negative 2. I don't care if it's a positive or a negative because we are going to square and that's always going to have a plus sign right here. Squaring negative 2, we get positive 4. X squared minus 4x plus 4 factors into x minus 2 quantity squared. So this negative 2 gets squared to go here. It's also appearing right here in our factors. Let's try one more. This time it's an odd number. That's okay. Half of an odd number will just be a fraction. Maybe put it over 1 so we can see that 1 times 5 is 5, and 2 times 1 is 2. So half of 5 is 5 halves. Don't forget to square. When we square 5 halves, we will get 25 fourths. 5 halves times 5 halves is 25 fourths. Since the first sign is a plus sign, the factors will have a plus sign. Half of 5 is 5 halves, and that's what goes into our factors. Now that I've shown you 3 more examples of this pattern, I'd like for you to pause the video and pull out your practice number 1 sheet and work problems 1 through 12. That should give you enough practice with this pattern. Here are the 12 problems. Let me do the first one with you. What I want you to do is find the one number that we can add right here to make this a perfect square trinomial, and then factor into the correct factors. So x squared plus 20x plus what? Half of 20 is 10, and 10 squared is 100. That's the perfect square that would make this a perfect square trinomial. And then that will factor into the square root of x squared is x. I have a plus sign. The square root of 100 is 10. So here's my trinomial, and here are the factors. Practice all the other ones and bring that with you to class so we can check. Thanks for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.